Vince Cable, thanks for coming on the programme. Let's start with the 4G sale. So in the autumn statement last year, the Chancellor factored in receipts that had not yet been collected of £3.5 billion for the 4G sale. And it was an important thing to do so because that allowed him to say that borrowing had not risen. Well, we now know that that number was blatantly wrong by £1 billion. What do you say to that?
Well, asset sales are notoriously difficult to predict. One never knows the state of the market. So the original figure was an estimate. A substantial amount has been realised.
But why build something on an estimate? Who organises their household along these lines?
Well, because you have to make forward estimates when you're planning a budget, and that's true nationally, and it's true for individuals. We have to make estimates, and sometimes the forward forecasts are over the point and sometimes they're below it. That's the nature of trying to anticipate the future. But actually,
you got this estimate wrong by £1 billion.
That's correct. Yes,
that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
And if you hadn't put up that high estimate, you would not have been able to make a politically very important claim for you that borrowing had not risen. Were you spinning the public a line at the time?
No, absolutely not. I think you look down the whole range of estimates in the autumn statement, you'll find that some come out more and some come out less than was predicted. That's the nature of short-term forecasting. I used to do this for a profession before I became an MP, and forecasting the future is an extraordinarily difficult thing. Let me just finish the point.
Mr. Cable,
can I just finish the point? I mean, there are some items in that estimate that will be larger than was realised. Some will be smaller. All these things will have to be netted out in the budget.
But this was a sleight of hand to the tune of £1 billion. And of course, immediately after it was made, people were questioning these numbers.
It's not a sleight of hand. Everybody knew that the government was trying to estimate what the asset market would be like in half a year's time, and that was a figure that seemed plausible and was something of an overestimate. In some cases, we've underestimated the strength of the economy. The figures today about employment, for example, show that the position is much better than was anticipated, and as a consequence, there is more tax coming in from people who are employed and less unemployment benefits. Sometimes estimates are very difficult to make.
But if you get your estimates wrong by that much and you make such a big political deal of it, how can the public possibly trust you?
Well, I think most of us didn't make a political deal out of it. I think it was probably
the Chancellor did.
So there was some exchange in the House of Commons about it. It was actually one small corner of a very big statement.
It was a very important part of the autumn statement.
Well, I don't think so. I've explained the issue to you. We have to make estimates of future asset sales. These are very difficult to make in the best of circumstances. Sometimes they're higher than you believe, sometimes they're lower. And that we've come out with a substantial number. A lot of other variables are changing, and this will affect the budget. I don't see quite why you're making such a meal of it.
Do you regret that estimate now?
No, absolutely not. As I say, I was in the business of future forecasting in business before I came into government, and almost by definition forecasts are wrong. You have to make the best estimate you can.
Well, why make them at all then?
Well, because you have to make some kind of planning. We don't live from day to day. Individuals don't, companies don't, and governments don't. Okay,
let's talk about unemployment. So some good news there today for you, but also some bad news, especially for youth unemployment. Let me give you a particular example. In Nottingham, Costa, the coffee chain, advertised 8 jobs and got 1,700 applicants. 1,700. That smacks of desperation, doesn't it?
Yes, but let's start with the big picture, which you described. Unemployment has fallen. It's falling faster than any other country in the G7. Employment is now more than it's ever been in our recorded statistics. If you take out full-time students, who are one component of youth unemployment's actually fallen. I mean, the overall employment story is a very, very positive one. Now, if you take the particular
very positive. If you're young and looking for a job in this country, you're having a terrible time.
It's certainly very difficult. I don't underestimate it. As it happens, I was in Nottingham a couple of days ago, and there are some very positive things happening in the Nottingham economy. I happen to go to Boots, very successful company there. The enterprise zone is being developed. There are biosciences flourishing. There's some very, very good things happening in Nottingham as it happened. But I do feel for those people who lost their jobs in the retail sector, and getting back into comparable employment in the short term is undoubtedly difficult. I realise that.
So on the markets today, the pound is at its lowest it's been to the dollar since 2010 and to the euro since, I think, the beginning of 2011. The markets think that this economy is sickly, don't they?
No, actually, the fact that the pound is more competitive is probably quite good news for a lot of our exporting companies and companies that compete against import.
But there's not a lot of confidence in the markets when they manage to push the pound this low this fast, as they have done in recent weeks.
Come on. I mean, the daily fluctuations in the exchange rate.
This is a trend, though. This has been going on for weeks now.
Well, we've had a substantial devaluation since 2009, and actually it's had a broadly positive effect on the economy, and it's a consequence of differential interest rates, it's a consequence of our monetary policy, and of many other factors. But actually, having a competitive exchange rate is probably good news for the real economy, so as I'm concerned.
Right, so you're happy with this devaluation of the pound?
Well, are you talking about since yesterday or since 4 years ago? If we're talking about the long-term trend...
The trend in the last few weeks. Are you happy with the fact that the pound is falling?
The government and the Bank of England do not try to manage the exchange rate on a daily or monthly basis.
I know, but as an economist, as someone who understands business, are you happy about this, yes or no?
No, I'm not concerned about short-term fluctuation in the exchange rate. What I do think is positive is the fact that the exchange rate in real terms is substantially more competitive than it was a few years ago. I think that is a positive trend.
Let's talk about the mansion tax. So, big idea of yours. Tories aren't very happy about it. Labour also want a vote on the mansion tax. They want it next week. Are you going to vote with Labour against the Prime Minister on the mansion tax?
Well, as I said when I was interviewed about this at the weekends, it depends entirely how they approach it. I mean, if they approach it in a statesman-like way, and they simply want a discussion on the merits of this particular tax proposal, I suspect that quite a lot of my colleagues, probably all of them, would be inclined to support whatever's being proposed. But if they want to play political mischief, very often is the case, and try to introduce extraneous issues, we will approach it in an opposite way. But my colleagues will be meeting at the beginning of next week. We will try to establish what's going on here, what is a sensible thing to do, and vote accordingly.
So are you talking to Labour about the exact wording of this motion?
No, I'm not talking to them at all, but I'm sure that
But that's important for you, isn't it? Because you want to vote with them on the mansion tax.
There is a process by which the government and the opposition whips prepare for these debates, and they will do it in the normal way. We're very clear that we think the mansion tax is a good, sensible idea. It's fair. And I think the majority of people in the country recognise that people with extreme wealth wrapped up in property should pay more in very difficult times. We'll continue to make that case whether or not this is put forward in Parliament in any particular way.
So really you can't not vote for it, because if you vote against it, if you vote with the Prime Minister on this, then you would be basically shredding yet another principle that you stand by.
No, the principle is quite clear. We're absolutely clear that we're in favour of a mansion tax. Parliamentary tactics is a totally different matter. But as I said, if the Labour opposition put forward a proposition which is uncontroversial for us and is merely a statement of fact and the desirability of the mansion tax, then I suspect my party would want to support it. But it depends entirely on the circumstances. Opposition day debates are very artificial Westminster occasions, and we'll obviously take that in mind as well.
So Nick Clegg was on LBC this morning, and the caller basically said, "Look, Mr. Clegg, what am I going to do? If I have this expensive house, £2 million plus, the only way I can afford to do that is, well, I won't be able to afford it." And what did Nick Clegg say? He said, "Remortgage your house." Is that a solution?
Well, if it's a £10 million property, they probably would have a very substantial bill. If it's worth 2.1 million, they paid hardly anything. So it depends entirely on the value of the property. There obviously is, I mean, the vast majority of people who live in very expensive property are very well off, and this is absolutely no problem for them. But there are particular cases. People might want to look for other sources of income through renting part of a large property, through equity release. There are numerous ways in which people could deal with this situation, and there will be a few hardship cases, people who are very wealthy but have relatively limited short-term income.
But this is the point, isn't it?
And there are already proposals under the council tax system where people can roll up their liabilities, and I'm sure something like that could be
But there
arranged.
are a lot of people in this country who are living in very expensive properties, which they bought quite cheaply a long time ago, but just don't have enough cash. Property rich, cash poor.
I don't think there are a lot of people living in very, very valuable property in the position you described, but there may be some individuals, and one has got to be sensitive to that. It is already an issue because, of course, we're talking about people who already pay council tax, and they may have very low income, they may get council tax benefit, depending on the circumstances. There are ways of deferring payments for compassionate cases. But this is a handful of people. We're talking, in essence, about extreme concentrations of wealth, and the fact is that people in very, very valuable property are often paying little or no more council tax than people in an ordinary suburban semi, and that is an inequality that has to be dealt with.
But just finally, to get back to the vote again, if you vote for the mansion tax next week, then against the Prime Minister, then again the question raises itself, what is the point of this coalition if you disagree on so many fundamental principles?
You're making a whole host of assumptions. We don't know what proposition is being put to Parliament. We haven't yet discussed it amongst our colleagues. What I'm absolutely clear about is my party believes in and wants to see implemented a mansion tax. We will pursue that within the coalition and beyond. That has got nothing whatever to do with the language that's been employed by the Labour Party in the short run. We're concentrating on the fundamentals.
Vince Cable, thank you very much.
Thank you.